Hi guys, okay, so this week we are talking about leprechauns and other Irish myths. So one of the things that you should know is that Irish storytelling way back when, it was not something that the children were actually a part of. It would happen in the dark. They would blow out all the candles and any lanterns or anything that really made light. And then the adults would sit around and they would tell these stories, and they were pretty horrific, some of them. Like bloody footprints, like on the outside of like houses and things like that. Like stealing children and replacing them with these strange creatures that would like wreak havoc on the lives of parents. So a lot of these stories weren't really happy things, and so children weren't really a part of the storytelling process. I'm actually going to tell you 3 stories. These are on the less terrifying side. So the first one that I'm going to tell you was told to me by a woman, and I was staying with her when I was visiting Galway. So it was her and her granddaughter, and they were telling us about the Cliffs of Moher. So the Cliffs of Moher are on the west coast of Ireland, and they're really famous. They're like these huge cliffs. They're absolutely beautiful. Not too good if you're afraid of heights. The story that they told, it went a little something like this. So one day, there was a man, and he was walking around, and he found a leprechaun. And so leprechauns are pretty slippery and slidey, and so he caught one, and he asked where the pot of gold was. And so the leprechaun bit him and ran off. And so he caught him again, and he's like, okay, where's your pot of gold? And so, that happened over and over and over, until finally the leprechaun's like, okay, you caught me, I'll tell you where it is. And then he points to this rock, and he's like, it's under that rock. And the guy's like, okay. And it was the only rock for miles. It's the only rock as far as the eye can see. And so he went home to go get something, because when he went over to the rock, there was like a hole underneath. And so the pot of gold was at the very back. And so he had to actually grab something to move the rock so he could get to the pot of gold underneath. He went off to go do that. And when he came back, he could not find the rock. Now, the reason that he couldn't find it was because even though the leprechaun didn't touch the rock or didn't move it, he actually made a ton of rocks appear. And so that's how the Cliffs of Moher were made, according to legend. Not sure how correct that is, but it's a fun story. And so he never found that pot of gold, and people still go to the Cliffs of Moher today to look for it. No one's ever found anything. So there's that one. And then another one is about Red Sox. Now, we're not talking about the baseball team. We're talking about like the socks that you put on your feet. So there was a man, and he was walking around one day, found a leprechaun, caught the leprechaun, normal stuff. And so one of the things that you should know about leprechauns is they cannot break a promise, and they always have to tell the truth. So he figured out a way to get the leprechaun to tell him where the pot of gold was. And he's like, okay, it's under that tree. Of course, because it was a Sunday, the man who caught the leprechaun had no shovel, so he could not dig underneath and find the pot of gold. And so before leaving, he took off one of his socks, and it was red. He tied a red sock around the tree so that he would know what it was, right? So he took out kind of like an insurance policy in a way. So he made the leprechaun promise to, 1, not to move from where he was, and to 2, he was not allowed to touch the red sock or alter it in any way, shape, or form. So the man went to go get the shovel, and then he came back, and the leprechaun didn't break his promise. He was still in the exact same place. The red sock that he had tied around the tree was still there. But he never found the pot of gold, because what the leprechaun actually did was he tied a red sock around every single tree in the forest. So this man could never find this pot of gold, right? They're tricky, they are clever, they know how to find a loophole, and they know how to wiggle their way out of stuff. I did mention stealing children at the beginning of the video. So the last story that I'm going to tell you is about changelings. Now, changelings are creatures. So when the fairies steal a human child, they will put something in its place so that the parents don't know, or they don't realize it right away. So a changeling is a creature that they put in place of the human child. And there's all sorts of like terrible, horrible things that happen to these creatures, the theory is that you cannot get your child back unless the changeling is out of the crib where your child used to be. It was a way of explaining children who were really healthy one minute and then grew to be very sick the next. And so it was pretty sad, and it's not a happy thing. But this story is not too unhappy. There was a young couple. They had just gotten married and they were so happy, and then they found out that they were going to have baby, but it wasn't just one child. They found out that she was pregnant with twins, and so they were ecstatic. And so for the first year, they were really happy and everything, but after their first birthday, everything changed, and the children were just screaming and crying, and there was no rest for the mother, there was no rest for the father, and it was really straining on these two people who were so much in love. So they lived on a farm, and one day the father asked the tailor in town to come and make him a suit because he really needed it. And so he asked, hey, can you come over and can you work all day on this? And so the tailor's like, sure, okay. And so he goes over, and of course this young mother is taking care of these screaming children, and they don't stop or anything, and it's absolutely terrible. And so lunchtime comes around, and so she's bringing food out to her husband, and the tailor, he's not too happy to be left alone with these two screaming children, but he goes along with it. And he wasn't really going to complain because he really needed the money. But as soon as the mother left, the children stopped. And what's even stranger is they started talking. Now we're talking about like really little babies, like less than 2 years old, and they're talking to each other. One of them's like, hey, it's been so long since we were able to like stretch our legs, why don't you play a tune and we'll dance? So one of them started playing some music, and like they both started dancing and everything, just completely ignoring the tailor. And of course he's completely shocked by this because here are two infants who are just dancing and talking and like acting like they're adults, basically. And so he was pretty shocked by this, but he knew that you don't exactly mess with the fairy world. And so he didn't say anything, and he sat there and he listened and he observed and he worked on the suit for the father. The mother comes back in, the babies like jump back in the crib as soon as they hear her walking up, and they immediately start screaming and crying as if nothing had even happened by the time that she gets back. Now, right as soon as they heard her come back, before they jumped into the crib, the changelings looked at the tailor and said, if you say anything, we will make your life absolutely terrible. You will wish that you had never been born. So, of course, he doesn't tell the mother, even though he knows that her children are changelings. And so here she is, and she's extremely stressed out. So by the time he finishes the suit and the fathers come in for the night, he sees these two people who are so much in love when they got married and everything, and he's just seeing them being torn apart by these screaming children. And so he takes the shovel for the fireplace and he sticks it under the fire, and he leaves it there for a few minutes, and then he grabs it and he sticks it underneath the children. Now, these children immediately stop screaming and crying like infants. They start screaming and cursing everything, and they run right out of the room, and the parents are just completely dumbfounded. They're shocked. They're like, what just happened? And then it dawned on them that their children had been changelings. And then the second thought that came into their heads were, what happened to our children? It wasn't too long that passed. It was less than a day. It was less than an hour, maybe a few minutes. A woman comes to knock on the door, and in her arms are two children. And so she doesn't say anything. The door opens. She places these two children in the cradle, and she still doesn't say anything. She turns around and walks away. Because fairies look like humans, so you can never really be too sure. For all you know, the person sitting next to you could be a fairy. The parents realized that that was a fairy woman, and she was actually bringing back their children, because you cannot get your children back. Like, there's no hope of getting them back if the changeling is in the crib. And so because they got the changelings out of the crib and to never come back, because as soon as that shovel went under them, they ran for the hills. They never came back. They got their children back in the end and, lived happily ever after. I mean, the fairies are tricky. They don't like people. You don't mess with the fairy world in Ireland. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed those stories. They're not very long, but yeah, so I will talk to you guys soon. Okay,